Good morning. I'd like to offer a special welcome to our Unitarian Universalist Church of Sarasota and our Lakewood Ranch Unitarian Universalists, as well as our guests and visitors. I'm the Reverend Doug Watkins. I'm the interim senior minister. I'm joined today by the Reverend Beth Miller, one of our associate ministers, who will be today's lead and offer the sermon. We also have Klaus Obermeit and Douglas Caldwell assisting with our crucial technical support, and our music will be offered by Don Bryn on the piano, Robert Laschetti, our director of music, and our mass choir. We are very happy to have our guest musician, Jane Hoffman. I'll tell you more about her in just a moment. We are very happy if you are joining us as a visitor, and we hope that while you are online, you'll take a moment on our homepage to click on our Welcome Visitor banner. That will take you to a special page that gives you a lot of information about the congregation. You can also sign our virtual guest book there, and we will send you our weekly newsletter, the contact, as well as links to our various online offerings. I hope you will take the next few weeks to get to know us and, of course, reach out if we can help you more. Also, after the service, we will have an online coffee hour, a chance for people to check in with each other and say hello. I hope that you will join us. It is the same link that folks use for the forum, and if you sign up, we will send you that link next week. So we are very happy to have as our guest musician Jane Hoffman. She teaches at the State College of Florida with Don Bryn. She plays principal flute for the Sarasota Pops and is the woodwind advisor for the Brookside Middle School, and says that she loves to perform around town and jam with other local musicians. So we are very pleased. And as we have our prelude, we will have music from Jane and Don. Thank you, Jane and Don. As we move into our service and our chalice lighting, I invite you, if you have a candle or a chalice at home, to light your chalice as we do here. Anything that you can do to be more a part of the service helps with that feeling of connection. Our words are written by Kimberly Ann Tomzak Carlson, A Place of Belonging and Caring. It is not by chance that you arrived here today. You have been looking for something larger than yourself. Inside of you, there is a yearning, a calling, a hope for more, a desire for a place of belonging and caring. Through your struggles, someone nurtured you into being, instilled a belief in a shared purpose, a common yet precious resource that belongs to all of us when we share. And so, you began seeking a beloved community, a people that do not put fences around love, a community that holds its arms open to possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and share your gifts. Welcome home. Welcome to worship. Catherine will light our chalice in this morning in recognition of the first three principles of our Unitarian Universalist faith: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations.
This month, for our religious education Zoom calls, we are focusing in on the third principle, asking some of those big questions like, is there a God? Or is there heaven or hell? Our Time for All Ages story today helps us understand relationships with each other, and our world around us, and yes, even some of those big questions. An old woman is nearing the end of her life, and as she closes her eyes one night, she sees a bright light and is transported into another realm. She doesn't pass away just then. Instead, she returns to the living world to find her family gathered at her bedside. She smiles and whispers to her children, "I have seen the great hereafter." "The great what after?" her son asks. "Heaven and hell, I have seen them both." The old woman goes on to explain, "I came upon a door, and behind it was hell, and what I saw there confounded me. There was a dining hall filled with rows of round tables, and on each table was a large pot of stew in the center, bubbling and steaming. It looked and smelled delicious. Yet the people seated around the tables were emaciated and sickly, moaning with hunger. As I came closer, I realized that each person held a very, very long spoon. With it, they could reach the stew, but the spoon was too long. It was much longer than their arm, and though they tried again and again, they couldn't bring the nourishment to their mouth. And in spite of the abundance before them, they were starving." She continued, "I left this horrid place and opened a new door, one that led to heaven, and inside I was surprised to see the same scene before my eyes, a dining hall filled with row upon row of round tables, and in the center of these tables, a delicious steaming stew. But instead of moaning with hunger, the people around the table were sitting contentedly, talking with one another, sated from the abundance before them. Like those in hell, these people were also holding very long spoons. And as I watched, a woman dipped her spoon into the stew before her, but rather than struggling to feed herself, she extended her spoon out and fed the man seated across from her. This person, now satisfied and no longer hungry, gave thanks and returned the favor, leaning across the table to feed the woman with his long spoon. Well, I suddenly understood the difference between heaven and hell, the old woman said to her family. It is neither the qualities of the place nor the abundance of the resources, but the way people treat each other. In hell, we are selfish. We would rather go hungry than to give people that we don't care for the pleasure of their eating. But in heaven, we feed each other. We put trust in those around us, and we never go hungry. Let us now sing our opening hymn, number 361.
Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Thank you, Mass Choir. And Jane, thank you for that beautiful prelude. That was absolutely stunning. Hello, and I add my welcome to that of Reverend Doug's. It's good to be with you this morning. Our words for centering are from the Reverend Gordon McKeeman. And after we have the words shared, we'll have a few moments of silence followed by singing together, Spirit of Life. Ministry, writes the Reverend McKeeman, but he means here the shared ministry we all share as part of a congregation and not just the work that clergy do. Ministry is a quality of relationship between and among human beings that beckons forth hidden possibilities, inviting people into deeper, more constant, more reverent relationship with the world and with one another, carrying forward a long heritage of hope and liberation that has dignified and informed the human venture over many centuries, being present with, to, and for others in their terrors and torments, in their grief, misery, and pain, knowing that those feelings are our feelings too. I'm going to repeat this, and I ask you to contemplate during our time of silence how you relate to those particular words. Ministry is a quality of relationship between and among human beings that beckons forth hidden possibilities, inviting people into deeper, more constant, more reverent relationship with the world and with one another, carrying forward a long heritage of hope and liberation that has dignified and informed the human venture over many centuries, being present with, to, and for others in their terrors and torments, in their grief, misery, and pain, knowing that those feelings are our feelings too. Please join me in silence.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. In preparation for our sermon, a couple of readings. The first is taken from the Reverend Scott Taylor. Our society teaches us to ask, what do I want? Our religion invites us to ask, whose am I? Two very different questions that lead us into very different lives. One question walks us down the path of accumulation and clinging. The other points to the way of community and connection. One says we find fulfillment in success, and the other says we find ourselves in belonging. So, friends, which question will allow you to lead us? Every single sacred tradition says our choice is a matter of life and death. The second reading is taken from the writing of Douglas Steere. The ancient question, who am I, inevitably leads to a deeper one. Whose am I? Because there is not identity outside of relationship. You cannot be a person by yourself. To ask whose am I is to extend the question far beyond the little self-absorbed self and wonder who needs you, who loves you, to whom are you accountable, to whom do you answer, whose life is altered by your choice, with whose lives all around you are all bound up inextricably in obvious or invisible ways. Here ends our reading. In a moment, we will receive another gift of music from Jane and Don. I invite you during the offertory to think about the many gifts in your life and how you are doing in living a life of generosity and abundance. We remind you that there is a donate button on the home page, and if you click on that button, not only can you give today, but you can also set up a recurring payment to either the congregation or to our outreach offerings. Either way, I hope this is a time for deeper connection in thinking about what a life of abundance means for each of us.
Thank you, Jane and Don. All right. So when I gave the sermon last month at the beginning of the Jewish High Holy Days, I talked about how difficult it is to forgive or even to let go of our anger toward the anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers who we feel are keeping us from getting beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And I talked about forgiveness and what it is and what it is not, and how it heals our own souls to cultivate a forgiving attitude toward those on the other pole in this polarized society in which we live, and how difficult all of that is. As we begin this month's worship theme of cultivating relationships, I want to bring it closer to home, to how we treat one another in our families, in our communities, and in our own congregations. Those people to whom we belong. So, here's a true story about how the Reverend Gail Geisenhainer became a Unitarian Universalist in the 1980s. Reverend Geisenhainer later became a minister, ordained in 1996, and served congregations in Canoga Park, California, Vero Beach, Florida, and Ann Arbor, Michigan, where she was named Minister Emerita when she retired in 2017. I can freely tell you her story because it's quite public. She preached about it at the Sunday service at the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly in St. Louis in 2006. If you were there, or if you saw the service or read that sermon later, you may well remember it. A briefer version of it was also printed in the UU World magazine in 2012. I've thought of it from time to time ever since because it's such a powerful story. We Unitarian Universalists claim that we don't evangelize, but Reverend Geisenhainer, I'm going to refer to as Gail just for the rest of this story, for a while anyway. Gail launches right into her story with the provocative statement, "I was forthrightly evangelized into Unitarian Universalism." There was scattered, somewhat nervous laughter from the congregation, thousands of people at General Assembly in the congregation that day. She says she was 38 years old, living in Maine and driving a snowplow for a living. She was feeling lonely and sorry for herself when a friend of hers invited her to his church. He said his church is different, but Gail didn't believe him, and she refused his invitation. She vehemently told him no thanks and said that, quote, "all blankety-blank churches are the same. They say they're open and accepting, but they don't want queer folk in their congregations." Her friend persisted and assured her that she should come and not hide any elements of who she was. He said she would be accepted just as she is. Finally, she agreed to go to church with him. She says that she dressed very carefully for her first Sunday at that church. She spiked her short hair straight up into the air. This was in the 1980s when spiked hair wasn't yet a thing. She dug out her oldest, heaviest work boots, the ones with a gash in the toe that showed the steel toe through. And she wore a leather jacket and torn jeans, again, before torn jeans were a thing. And she said in the story, quote, "Those people would embrace my full Amazon glory, or they could go fry ice." Hear it in Gail's words. She writes, "I carefully arranged my outfit so it would highlight the rock-hard chip I carried on my shoulder. I bundled up every shred of pain and hurt and betrayal I had harbored from every other religious experience in my life, and I lumbered into that tiny meeting house on the coast of Maine. Blue jeans and boots, leather jacket, spiked hair, and belligerent attitude. I accepted my friend's invitation and I went to his church. I expected the gray-haired ladies in the foyer to step back in fear, That would have been familiar. Instead, they stepped forward, offered me a bulletin, a newsletter, and invited me to stay for coffee. It was so odd. They never even flinched. They called me dear, but they pronounced it dia. Stay for coffee, dia. I stayed for coffee. I stayed for Unitarian Universalism. Over time, the good folks of that church loved up the scattered parts of me and guided me from shattered to whole, from outcast to beloved among many. That's what our first principle, affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person, is about. This little Unitarian Universalist congregation on the coast of Maine looked beyond Gail's initial presentation, her anger and brokenness, and accepted her as she was. They gave her the benefit of the doubt. They honored her inherent worth and dignity. Now, the story doesn't end there. Life is messy, and this congregation was no different. It was a small church that had a ritual found in many of our congregations, the ritual of sharing joys and concerns during the Sunday service. One Sunday, early in Gail's time with this congregation, a woman stood up and spoke during joys and concerns. She said that all homosexuals had AIDS. All homosexuals were deviants who could not be trusted with children, public health, or civil society. All homosexuals should be quarantined, packed off to work camps to provide useful labor for society, and keep their filthy lifestyle and deadly diseases to themselves. Whoa. Whoa. No one else who shared normal things like birthdays said anything about it. There was a student minister preaching in the pulpit that day, and near the end he said something about how not all sentiments expressed that morning were shared by the whole congregation. But that was it. Gail left quickly at the end of that service, not sure she would come back. But she did return the next Sunday. And during Joys and Concerns, something remarkable happened. A number of folks stood up and awkwardly announced that not everything said the week before was right or true or representative of who they were as a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Gail says, quote, "That congregation had reached a crossroads where one among them had begun the use of language that would depersonalize and endanger others. She, the woman who had spoken the previous week, tried to create a class of less than human persons toward whom violence would be acceptable. The congregation gently refused to follow." But an even more extraordinary and wonderful thing happened. The congregation refused to depersonalize, refused to dehumanize that original speaker. Our second and third principles call us to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. The original speaker's proclamations were neither just, equitable, nor compassionate, and certainly not accepting of difference. But rather than condemn her, her fellow congregants accepted her. No, not her words, but her inherent worth and dignity. And they subtly encouraged her to attend to her spiritual growth. Gail says she learned that her friend was right. His church was different. His church really cared about making things right for everybody. And she learned that in community, when things get ugly, we do not just walk away. Our theme for October is cultivating relationships. When Reverend Geisenhainer described in 2006 from her experience in the mid-1980s is a kind of relationship cultivation that seems so antiquated to us right now, doesn't it? We are so quick to judge negatively, to condemn, to cancel others. Now, that woman was clearly out of line and out of step with the deeply held convictions of the congregation, encouraged by our Unitarian Universalist principles. Her proclamation was clearly indefensible, and no one defended it, nor did they defend her free speech right to inflict her hateful point of view on the congregation. That's not my point. The point is that they drew boundary lines within the parameters of our principles. Reverend Geisenhainer put it this way in her story. She says, the congregation stayed in what Martin Buber called an I-thou relationship with her. They did not start calling her names, that homophobe, that gay basher. None of that happened. While the speaker tried to turn homosexuals into objects to be manipulated, the congregation never referred to the speaker in a way that was less than embracing and respectful of her full humanity. Could we be so generous, so faithful to our principles? I don't know. Did the woman have a conversion experience, discover the error of her ways, and come to accept LGBTQ persons as a result? I don't know. Reverend Geisenhainer doesn't say. I do know that during the early 1990s, when I was leading the welcoming congregation curriculum in my first congregation as a new minister, a number of homophobic members of that congregation had changes of heart. And I know that in recent times, many of us are learning so much about white supremacy culture, how systemic racism and unconscious bias work, and about the unconscious participation and privilege we white people have. And we are trying to truly understand and learn how to participate in making the world a more just and equitable place for all people. I don't know what happened with that woman, but the congregation's response gave her the opportunity to remain in community and grow spiritually. We don't know what happened with her, but I fear that in today's world, even in a congregation of people sincerely trying to live our principles, she would have been immediately ganged up on, shamed, and cast out. Repentance and restoration to right relationships wouldn't have been an option given to her. And you know what? I understand that impulse. I really do. There is just too much overt hatred expressed in our world today. We're fed up with it, aren't we? Our tolerance for homophobic, sexist, and racist rhetoric is exhausted. And folks who express that stuff are just wrong. We want to condemn them with our righteous anger. I understand that impulse. Yes, they're wrong. That's true. Yes, yes. And what about our principles? How do we cultivate relationships in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our workplaces, in our church? How do we cultivate relationships that recognize and respect what we proclaim our inherent worth and dignity, justice, equity, and compassion, acceptance of others, and encouragement to spiritual growth? Now later, in that same congregation, Reverend Geisenhainer says she opened the hymnal to find the words attributed to the Buddha. Never does hatred cease by hating in return. He taught, let us overcome violence by gentleness. Only through love can hatred come to an end. Never does hatred cease by hating in return. That's really what those first three Unitarian Universalist principles boil down to, isn't it? Not returning hatred for hatred, returning love, or at least respect instead. I know it's a hard sell in today's polarized world, but that's what I'm trying to sell to you today, folks. And I say us because I find it just as hard as anyone else does to return love for hate. I do. But I believe our faith implores us to try to do just that. Return love, or at least respect. That is the work of spiritual growth. Laurie Duchesne, author of Tiny Buddha, Simple Wisdom for Life's Hard Questions, wrote this: be the person who breaks the cycle. If you were judged, choose understanding. If you were rejected, choose acceptance. If you were shamed, choose compassion. Be the person you needed when you were hurting, not the person who hurt you. Vow to be better than what broke you, to heal instead of becoming bitter, so you can act from your heart, not from your pain. As we contemplate how we cultivate relationships this month, let us be mindful of our principles. Let us consider how they call us to relate to others and try to break the cycle of hatred. So may it be. Amen. And now please join us in our closing hymn, Come and Go With Me.
To that land, come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land, where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. Where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound.
Our closing words this morning are among my favorite closing words. They're in our hymnal. They're by the Reverend Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. We extinguish the flame, symbol of our faith. May we tend it in our hearts until we are together again. See you at coffee hour. Have a blessed week. Amen.